Cancelled projects are a treasure trove of some of the best art and design in the entire video game industry. Depending on the scope of a project, a studio might spend an unfathomable amount of time and resources developing and executing the team's vision. This means that when a game is cancelled, what's left behind is sometimes years of production work that will never see the light of day. If you're familiar with this channel, then you know that we like to highlight a lot of the art and artists behind some of our favorite games. But the reality of the industry is that some of an artist's best work is oftentimes buried in the cancellation of a project. So today we're going to be looking at one of these examples, a science fiction MMO that was cancelled mid-production and had some of the most talented, skilled, driven, and experienced artists who were in the process of building one of the most interesting science fiction worlds I've ever seen. These artists were surprisingly allowed to share the art and designs of the game that they were working on, resulting in the release of over 300 pages of the most remarkable concept art I've ever seen. So today we'll be journeying into this world. A world where the technological golden age of humanity is threatened by a mysterious energy that is slowly corrupting and eating away at the universe. We'll be exploring what this energy is, the effects that it has on the beings of our universe, and we'll be looking at the factions scrounging for power at the center of our narrative. As always, I'll be giving you my thoughts and commentary along the way, and we'll be introducing some of the artists responsible for many of these masterpieces. Before we start, leave a like and subscribe for more, but without further ado, let's jump into the strange universe of Project Falcon. Okay, so let's begin with some brief history. Project Falcon was one of the 4 games that were unfortunately cancelled with the closure of their development studio, Phoenix Labs. You might be familiar with Phoenix Labs if you've played Dauntless, which was an action hunting game and was a combination of Monster Hunter-esque mechanics with a cartoony stylized art direction. Now, at its height, Dauntless was actually a fairly successful game release, and at its peak when the game launched in 2019, according to this article, the game had over 15 million active players. Now, even though the game is no longer playable today as the studio has shut down, I'm assuming the success of its launch is what gave Phoenix Labs the resources to start development on these subsequent titles. Now, as I mentioned, Project Falcon was one of the games that Phoenix Labs was working on, alongside Project Lax and Project Dragon, all of which had phenomenal art that was actually released as well. But amongst the 3, Project Falcon stood out to me not only because of its rich sci-fi world, but also because it was being worked on by some of the most renowned artists in the industry. Specifically, I was surprised to see how many top-tier character designs were created for this project by one of my favorite studios currently in the industry, SixMoreVodka. But before we get to the character designs that really motivated me to create this video, let me first paint a quick picture of the background and game concept of Project Falcon. So the broad narrative for Project Falcon centers around this mysterious energy called entropy. The exact source of this energy is unknown, but what is known is that it's not only slowly accelerating the heat death of the universe, but it's also corrupting and giving strange powers to the environments, characters, and the beings of our world, oftentimes warping their bodies in strange ways. Now, on the Phoenix Labs end, the explorations for this energy, entropy, began as somewhat of a prisma-colored nova in the far reaches of space, an energy that is expanding its influence and effects to some of the nearby planetary terrains and environments. It looks like early on this energy might have manifested itself in the form of these giant creatures as well. This entropic energy would also find its way into the machinery and robots, and early on I assumed that this would have given our PvE enemies somewhat of a wispy, corrupted look. So there's a glimpse into the very initial stages of Project Falcon. As a loose science fiction third-person MMO shooter concept where the player would have gathered materials to craft gear and weaponry, where they would have interacted with other players and characters in these central hubs, our character would have been able to explore these different planets and strange environments, and all the meanwhile interacting with the narrative of these multiple factions that control various aspects of the world. For the environments and landscapes of the Falcon universe, Phoenix Labs actually worked with Terraform, which is another really well-established and experienced outsourced studio, and they created these early planetary explorations for the different potential scenic backdrops of the game. If you're looking at all of this, everything that we've shown so far, and you're maybe struggling to see how it would have all come together, that's a totally normal response and reaction to really early concept blue sky work. Early on in the development process, most of the time there's very few things that are nailed down, and oftentimes there's not yet a confident direction that the team is set on pursuing to the end. Which means that early art for a game project is usually different directional pitches, offering different visual paths that the team could potentially pursue. Which is why in these early landscapes, the goal is more to capture a sense of atmosphere and scale, providing an aspirational look for potential lighting and location themes. And we see less things that are more concrete, like player pathing or, architecture. But now that we have a broad scope of the general world of Project Falcon in its earliest stages, we can finally move on to the amazing character work from SixMoreVodka. Now, these guys were first known for their outsourced work for Riot Games, but when they released their own tabletop game, The Genesis, the art that was created for that project really cemented their expertise in character design and character illustration. Phoenix Labs approached SixMoreVodka with a rough skeleton of the sci-fi MMO world that they wanted to build. So after putting in place a few of the narrative cornerstones, SixMoreVodka really had free reign to create the aesthetics, the factions, the characters to fill out the Falcon universe. So the characters of Project Falcon are divided into 3 core factions: the Pirates, the Corporation, and the Zeros. These factions each have their own internal sub-factions, visual themes, and cultural practices. And while I won't be able to cover all of these details and all of these characters, I'll have all of SixMoreVodka's links in the description below if you want to take a closer look at the story of Falcon. What stands out to me in this set, and as I previously mentioned, what motivated me to create this video, is primarily the work of Ricardo Silveira, who demonstrates his character illustration expertise in these painterly character renders that to me stand out as the most visually striking moments in this set of art and design. Along with his fellow talented artists, the SixMoreVodka team was able to create an unbelievable amount of high-quality character concepts. Let's begin by going back to this idea of entropy. It looks like a bulk of the exploration that was done for this game centers around the fusion of organic and inorganic matter by way of entropy. And the results of this exploration is what became the Zero faction, which is a group of artificial intelligence that has been warped by entropy in strange ways. There's a lot of really remarkable design work in these Zero sub-factions, where the team is really trying to find these interesting ways of balancing industrial mechanical design with vibrant VFX. I'm a big fan of the Revelator, who was an underwater salvage bot that, through entropy, developed its own consciousness and grew these fluid limbs that seemed to summon schools of these pearlescent fish. I'm loving the contrast between this rigid mechanical plating as well as the geometric pattern of its weapon, with its vibrant and fluid limbs, which together with a strange school of fish adds an extra layer of intrigue. And that intrigue is really the spark of these characters, right? When I see designs like the Pleiad, where even with this description, I'm finding myself curious and asking a lot of questions about this design's origin, without simply denying or rejecting its believability, which is really the biggest challenge when you're creating these concepts and character designs that are so far out of the realm of imagination, where we've seen time and time again that even a little bit of stylistic or conceptual ambiguity can cause the design to be immediately rejected by its audience. This point will become more prevalent as we look at some of the humanoid characters, but for the time being, another character who I thought was very impactful is Unit 4, whose design has an overtly more antagonistic look, whether it be her sharp claws or her bright red eyes. But there's a morbid beauty to her strange, twisted anatomy, which I think is one of the core themes for these mechanical characters, this combination of slightly grotesque organic forms with machinery and vibrant energy. Seeing all of these different designs and takes on entropy, it makes me think that these would have been some of our PvE enemies and bosses of the game. But now let's move over to some of the human characters, starting with the Pirates. The Pirates are probably the most visually diverse faction, and in these instances when designing these characters and factions, one of the initial challenges becomes finding some sort of unifying motivation or ideological practice. For the Pirates, this becomes the Star Child. As written in SixMoreVodka's post, the Star Child is a mythical figure from the depth of history, the first person to be born in space, free from the shackles of gravity and the inheritor of free will. The Pirates believe themselves to be all descended from this singular lineage, a tenuous chain of blood linking them back to a long-forgotten home. As the stories go, the Star Child reincarnates every generation to a newborn, somewhere in the universe, and it's believed and prophesized that should this Star Child be discovered and placed on to the throne of the Pirates, all of the different sub-factions and clans would come together and unify, and become a singular, unstoppable group. In this initial synopsis, we are introduced to some of our first characters, our Pirate Queen and her Soothsayer. I really love these different design versions for our pirate queen, and immediately I can recognize her military composure, placing her more in the role of a general or a captain over that of a reserved, regal, queenly figure. There's a boldness to these designs and these costumes, where Silvera is not afraid to commit to these unexpected shapes and subdivisions. A limited focus on functionality can oftentimes be restrictive when trying to create narrative designs for a unique world. So the challenge becomes balancing our implied functionality with our storytelling and visual themes in order to create an illusion for the audience and to veer them away from questioning believability. In that respect, I think these designs are all very successful to varying degrees, with there almost being a spectrum of least to most whimsical. I'd be curious to hear what your favorites are in the comments below, but for the time being, let's move on to our next character. Mauve and Solifuge work directly under the Queen, with Mauve being the religious figurehead of the pirate faction, and Solifuge being the Queen's inquisitor. These two characters have an interesting pale mechanical skin, which really makes me curious about their biology. Now that we've taken a look at the pirate leadership, let's dive into a few more of the members of this faction. As I mentioned, there's a lot of narrative diversity within the pirate faction, with their members being primarily categorized into 4 main sub-factions: the underground smugglers of Bridge, the self-sustaining drifters of Fringe, the fashion-forward icons of Peacock, and the corporate collaborators of the Sleepers. It's hard to describe an overarching design philosophy that can encapsulate all of these different groups, but according to SixMoreVodka, the biggest focus when designing these pirates was a sense of freedom. In-game, I assume the pirate faction would have been characters that we interacted with most throughout our journey. They have a much more casual, accessible, and conceptually relatable look compared to the mechanical bodies of the Zeros or the sleek attire of the Corporation. Which, on that note, let's meet our final character faction, the Corporation. You can't have a science fiction galactic story without some giant intergalactic empire or conglomerate. The world of Falcon is no different, and with flavor text like this, I'll bet this faction was intended to be the villains of our story. The Corporation fulfills its classic role of valuing control and stability over anything else. The discovery of entropy was seen as an aberration to the Corporation, as its use represented chaos in the carefully crafted system of control that they owned. However, not even they could resist the power that it granted, attempting to combine the chaotic energy with the purity of machinery. It's revealed that the Zero faction was in fact created by the Corporation through accursed experiments to control entropy's power. Although the Corporation is a somewhat expected faction within a science fiction intergalactic world, the SixMoreVodka team is still able to create a plethora of unique designs. In particular, I'm really drawn to Tempura, whose costume has some really interesting subdivisions that flow from her shoulder to her lower body. Tempura is the public face of the corporate leadership. Her face is plastered across billboards, company bulletins, internal messages, but she's merely a facade so that the true leadership can remain hidden. Therefore, she is designed to be flashy in order to divert attention away from characters like Vigo, who is a part of this small group of people who actually run and oversee the Empire. The Corporation is once again divided into 4 core sub-factions, including the conglomerate monarchs of the Lead faction, the scientists and engineers of the Unite faction, the internal enforcers of the Secure faction, and the outward colonizers of the Merge faction. Visually, the attire of the Corporation focuses a lot on minimalistic outer shapes and utilitarian accents over white bases, representing different departments and specialties. Where the pirates represented freedom and diversity, the Corporation embodies and enforces conformity and unity across the galaxy. But even with this bleak description, I'm finding there to be a lot of visual interest built from high fashion reference and inspiration. And I'm also finding that the monochromatic corporate color schemes allow for a lot of very interesting textural contrast in these costumes. Many of the characters that we looked at for the Corporation are illustrated by Ibrahim Swade, whose work has a much more brushier quality to it, which is pleasantly gestural as we zoom in. There were so many other phenomenal artists who were part of this team, and I highly recommend that you check out SixMoreVodka's site and ArtStation if you're interested in learning more. I'll link the SixMoreVodka Discord below, where you can find the 300-page art bible that they created for Project Falcon. Now that we've reached the end of our character factions, I do want to point out that it's important to keep in mind that even with this amazing set of carefully illustrated characters, this still represents only the very initial stages of world building for a video game. Although there's plenty of intricate relationships and great depth in storytelling, these things only would have continued to be polished as development for the game went on. And it's here as we go through some of the characters that we didn't get a chance to speak about that I want to speak a little bit about why I chose this project as a topic. Perhaps no one needs me to say that good character design is important, but during a transitory time in the video game industry, I feel a need to repeat the importance of artists and the importance of good handcrafted art in production. I feel concept art is rarely celebrated, which makes sense because it's oftentimes not visible to the general audience. Behind every memorable video game and cinematic world is a team of artists who meticulously, through years of training and learning about the larger landscape of art and design, captured a spark and built visual intrigue and was able to communicate and illustrate that vision. I feel that the focus in the industry nowadays is shifting towards what exists and what works. And while a science fiction MMO isn't exactly untreaded territory, when I see the art that was made for this project, I very much do believe that these artists managed to capture the spark of a wondrous world. And even though that by no way means that this would have guaranteed a successful game and a fun experience, the fact that these designs immerse me in the world and make me wish that we got to walk through it is a sign of their success and should absolutely be celebrated. All this just to say that I wish we saw more recognition and celebration of not just games but their artists. And through these videos I want to continue to highlight the talent within the industry, even for a project that is cancelled. The last bit of art that we'll be talking about for this video is Falcon's Spaceships. I'm assuming selecting and upgrading our vehicle would have been a big part of the gameplay for Project Falcon, as there's a really vast amount of explorations and paintings, iterating between different versions and archetypes for the spaceships of our world. There's a really fun variety of design, ranging from more classic jets to stealthier bombers, and even this. These vehicles were designed by Till Freytag, who's one of my favorite artists in the industry because of his ability to create complex hard surface designs through painterly brushwork. And honestly, seeing many of these spaceships really made me wish we got a chance to ride in them. Now, apart from these spaceships that were designed by Till Freytag, I also really wanted to mention the work of Alejandro Perdicio, legendary science fiction illustrator, who designed a lot of spaceships and interiors for this project. I love looking through all of these pencil sketches, which have a really classic gestural energy to them. There's something about seeing the texture of the graphite and the little smudges that come with this traditional way of working that breathes a lot of life into these ship designs, which combined with his ability to capture these complex forms and his expert experience in shape design result in some very interesting explorations that remind me a lot of his personal work, which is absolutely a compliment because if you know the guy, then you know that he's an absolute master when it comes to designing for science fiction. Once again, there's a massive bulk of explorations here for various ship designs, different shapes, different colors. And there's a really commendable depth of thought as we follow some of this design work for the interiors of these spaceships, where there's a really intricate methodology when it comes to constructing all of these different forms and placing a lot of these environmental props. I'm seeing a lot of classic film set design training, in particular in the way that our perspective grid is set up and the sort of hallmark shorthand of set design figures. And Alejandro continues to flex his incredible range as we venture into some of the more fleshed out paintings that were done for these spaceships. In these larger painted environments, there's still a phenomenal sense of the traditional nature of these paintings, right? Very reminiscent of even the 70s era science fiction illustrators that we spoke about in our previous videos. You know, John Harris, Sid Mead. It's really an art and a way of working that we're seeing less and less in the industry today, and I'm sort of wishing and praying for the resurgence of a more traditional era. But with that brings us to the end of the art and design for Project Falcon. Once again, keep in mind this is a very limited look at the art that was created for this game. And there are plenty of artists that I didn't mention and characters that we didn't look at. So I'll have a lot of links in the description below if you want to see even more art. Art for canceled games is a topic that I've wanted to cover for the longest time because some of my favorite art and designs are the ones that never made it to production. And especially as it came to this project, Project Falcon, there were just genuinely so many phenomenal, renowned artists that were brought into the fold. I hope this was an interesting journey for those of you that are interested in art and design, and I hope I was able to bring a little bit more attention to all of the hard work that goes on behind the scenes. I'll have all of the information for the artists that we showed today in the description below. As always, let me know your thoughts and favorites in the comments. Thank you for watching to the end, and I will see you next time.